Greetings! It is I, Tempest Naravan Dracovin, Lord and Emperor of the Dracovin Empire, and welcome. It is time to continue my discussion on the various campaign settings that have been introduced to Dungeons & Dragons that are being used since, well, 2nd edition, AD&D. I started, of course, with SPELLJAMMER, and I still have a bunch of information to tell you about SPELLJAMMER. But let's continue diving in where we left off. Let's talk about some specialized equipment for both your ship and your crew. So most equipment that you can find with a groundling works just fine in space. Normally speaking, you're just going to be fine with the equipment you're going to take if you're coming from a planet to space. Even for ships, a lot of that still translates over. But there is some extra stuff which helps particularly better in space. Let's talk about some of it. The fact is, let's start with the ship-based equipment. Your ship's going to need an anchor still. Now you're going to say, why an anchor? It's not based in water. Well, in space you can stop short, but if you're on a planet, or in the planet, you might just want to hover there, because sometimes a ship doesn't have a water or ground-based landing. If you're hovering there, an anchor will actually help, because when you're hovering, wind affects you. That's why you have an anchor. Now, you're going to need some ways of getting materials off of it. A cargo hoist is actually the easiest way to get materials on and off a ship, especially when you can't throw down a gangplank. If you're on a planet or something, that hoist is what you're going to need. So it is a specialized piece of equipment that a bunch of spelljamming ships have. A easier but more difficult version of that is an anchor hoist. That same anchor line that you drop down in order to basically anchor yourself to the ground, there can be a specialized hoist attached to that. The advantage of this is you don't need a crew to operate it. The cargo hoist, you need a bunch of guys working on that. This one, the people that are on it can operate it. The disadvantage is it's less reliable, it can carry less weight, so there are some disadvantages to using an anchor hoist. It's just the fact that it can be used without having to have a group of people using it. It frees up crew. There's, of course, sleeping chambers. Especially on long trips, you have to worry about air and food. This was a sort of magical-based technology that was developed in order to help alleviate that. Once you start traveling within the area between crystal spheres, the phlogiston, well, there is a material within it that is basically put into these sleep chambers, and when someone enters into it, it puts them in a state of suspended animation. So you will be asleep until someone gets within a crystal sphere, and at that point in time, they will open it up, and effectively, hey, you wake up again. The thing about this is it's not 100% reliable. You can die during that trip. The state it puts you in is like a near-death state, technically, where you don't need food, water, air the same way you would before. So, yeah. And, you know, it is more expensive to use these, so poorer people just don't have that option. Though, it is actually, in a way, more reliable, because you don't have to worry about your air getting fouled or running out of food. And it works better for you as a traveler because of that. A little danger makes up for it. Then there's stonets. The fact is, ships can get jostled around. They do have their own gravity zone, but things can happen, especially with collisions in space are more than likely in comparison like collisions at oceans. That's why stonets exist, which you can attach to various places in the hull or bulkheads in order to effectively stow materials against there. It's a way of keeping some loose gear and materials at hand that you could sort of zip open some of the sides of it, you know, kind of unhooking it, that you can get in there and get that material, but you still keep it secured when you need to. There's also stow pods, which are very similar to this, but are made out of plant material. The disadvantage about stow pods is they tend to be much more fragile than stow nets, but they're much cheaper. So they're based off of plant material that you'd find on some kind of planet, like a kind of pod keeping things safe. But, you know, it's less price, more chances that thing might break open. That's the sort of trade-off you have with them. Now let's move on and talk about some items that you as a person might want to get that are specifically based around spelljamming. First off is tethers. Now you might say, oh, well, tethers, that seems like something normal, but these tethers can be attached to you, attached to portions of the ship. The point is that when you drop something out into wild space, retrieving it's really hard. So if you're doing something where you might drop something, there are tethers you can get. Whether you're attaching it to yourself, which then you have the danger that if you're attaching like a weapon to yourself, someone could grab that tether and use it to drag you around. Or you could attach it to things like rigging or the edge of the ship if there's some kind of railing to it. Regardless of where you're attaching it to, it's the point that you're making it that should that weapon drop, it doesn't fly out into space and you can get it back very easily. Now there's cold light. The thing is, when you're in the phlogiston, it's flammable. Fire will cause explosions and death there, and it's really bad. So sometimes you need light, especially within that inner portions of the ship where it was going to be dark, where you don't have like sources of light getting in there. That's where dwarfs developed this cold light. It's in fact a glowing fungus that they put in lanterns that, with just some simple basic ship maintenance, you keep them alive. And then you could just use this light. Now granted, it produces less light than a candle, but it's still enough that if you're in an inner workings of a ship, it's better than nothing. And the fact is, it is much cheaper than the continual flame, and something like that, like getting an ever-burning torch. That's much more expensive, which is its counterpart. The I don't set fire to things magical fire. That doesn't produce heat. This doesn't produce heat, and with just a little bit of maintenance, a little bit of water pretty much is all it needs, a little bit of moisture that you have to get maybe like daily to it. It works just fine. And again, as I said, much cheaper. Now, signaling kit, well, it's important to signal their ships. Sound doesn't travel very well in wild space, so it's a number of things that can be used for visual communications between two different ships. It's helpful because you're not going to be able to send like messages the same way between ships. And the last one is, of course, a priest icon, a divine icon. The fact is, especially when you're out in the phlogiston, or in a crystal sphere that's much different than your own, if you're a divine spellcaster, a priest or something, you might not have the same connections to your deity. If your deity isn't in that crystal sphere, or if you're in the phlogiston, again, you don't have divine connections. So those that study the divine arts, they tend to only be able to memorize up to 2nd level spells. 3rd level or higher, they have trouble. Granted, there are some spells developed for spelljammers to allow you to basically memorize spells of those higher levels, but they're very temporary, and you're using up resources to do that. That's where this comes in. The priest icon. Effectively what it is when you're in your home sphere, you fill it with divine energy. You take some time and have it gather up that divine energy. So when you're in the phlogiston, or when you're in a sphere where your deity does not have any influence, you can use this as a connection to them. Basically a little like lifeline that you can memorize your higher level spells. Granted, it will eventually run out of this energy, but it will give you a couple of more time. It'll give you some more times that you can effectively memorize it. It's not the most portable thing, but it's a thing that's probably pretty critical to being a divine spellcaster and being a spelljammer. Now let's talk about docking, because this is going to be an important part of you for journeying. Now, the thing is, when you're docking, most spacefaring cultures, you think it would be more difficult if you're visiting new places, but if they're spacefaring, there is an actual sort of basic guide, basic kind of rule book that all spacefaring cultures sort of have adapted to a major degree. There are some variations in it, but basically if you follow this guide, you're good at docking in these places. The first is, you have to signal that you're coming into dock. This will usually involve something like a signaling kit, magic, something else like that. Some way that you can communicate with the people at the dock and let them know you're arriving. Now, most of the time, you're going to be let there. There's not going to be denial to you. There are some reasons for denial. If you're part of a warring faction that's opposite of their faction, they might let you down. If they've got a lot of, like, let's say, that's a beholder ship's already in their docks, and you're a rival faction beholder ship, they know you guys are going to fight it out. Granted, if they're big enough docks, they'll probably try to keep races that would fight with each other very separate. Basically kind of separate them out so they don't get into combat with each other. But the fact is, most of the time, they're not going to turn you away. They're going to at least let you dock there. It's very rare that it gets into a circumstance where that's going to occur. Even if they've decided to turn you away, traditionally they're going to allow a ship to at least refresh its air. Maybe possibly get some supplies depending on what kind of place you're visiting. Certain places might, allow for supplies to be quickly gotten. Others will probably just at least let you refresh your air. It's going to be a matter of probably how, friendly they are as a general race. Now's the time you dock. And now you're actually subject to a lot of the rules and regulations of the port you're at. The first thing it's going to have is going to be cargo inspector. Now, the cargo inspector works a lot differently than you'd think for a lot of things. They can't really inspect anything on your ship. This is a rule that helps especially with things like Nyogi ships, and just because they look at your cargo, they can't confiscate it normally. That's also good for Nyogi ships, unlike a human port, because they might have slaves in that hold that they're trading with someone, and, you know, they're letting them effectively do it. Granted, certain ports, depending on circumstances, might still confiscate your ship and your crew and your cargo, but that's usually all in one. Now, traditionally, if they find something that's basically they don't like on your ship, well, then they're effectively going to throw you out. That's the usual thing. Again, that's when it comes into Nyogi. If they find something they don't like, they might actually confiscate your ship or something. But you are effectively allowed to declare something to them beforehand. If you present them with some kind of item or some kind of good that you have on it, and they approve of it, you're fine. They know about it. If they disapprove of it, well, if it stays on your ship, it's not technically entering their port, and it's not smuggling. So that's the rule for it, is if you've at least let them know about it, you're fine with whatever it is that you what they might consider smuggling otherwise. You're effectively declaring, oh, I have these weapons aboard my ship. They're like, well, you better keep those weapons aboard your ship. We don't want them in our port. But at least they know about it. It's when they find stuff they don't know about that problems start to occur. Generally speaking, you're going to move up to your gangplank and show off these things to basically declare them at the customs. Now, there's going to be some fees associated with it. Traditionally, it's between 1 to 4 gold pieces per ton that your ship weighs. That includes cargo when you're coming into port. Granted, some places use keel length as a measuring stick for this rather than actual tonnage, but both are things that they might charge you for. Then they might also charge you for heads that are coming aboard. The reason for this, that they would charge you 5 to 10 gold pieces per some person basically coming aboard, basically going on either shore leave or visiting, is for things like Dracon ships where there's an entire herd. Yeah, they're going to charge. They don't want an entire herd coming into town. They don't have space for that. So that's a way of keeping people on your ship normally, and it might restrict it that, you know, only a few select people might be going into port. Granted, not all ports have this, but there are some that do. Now, they will also probably charge you for air. Usually this is 1 to 2 gold pieces per person aboard your ship to refresh your air supply. If your air is fouled, it will change that to usually 5 to 8 gold per ton of ship they're unfouling your air of, because wherever you're visiting, normally these docks are out in space too, so they're going to have their own air supply they're going to have to maintain. So yes, you're messing with that air supply. Now, much like when you were originally coming in, priority is given to when you're trying to leave. That's it. Normally, unless there's an emergency, the priority is, oh, I'm leaving. You tell them you're leaving, and you just go. Traditionally, after you've basically visited here, you go and you declare with the dock master how long you're going to stay. You pay off your money. You're fine. That's when, at the end of the time, you get ready, you leave. You leave in the order that, you know, you start to leave in, effectively. Again, just the same as when you came in. And, of course, emergencies might occur. That's when the schedule of things gets changed around. So that's it for today. I introduced you to some new equipment for spelljamming. I talked about some equipment for your ship, which seems a lot like stuff you might find on an ocean-based ship, but it's been refined down to a way for space travel. And I introduced you to some equipment as a personal person that you might have, a personal equipment that's great for spelljamming ships. And again, some of it seems like it would be on a ocean-based vessel, but they don't really appear in the technology level of the ships that you would encounter in a normal D&D game anyway. From there, I moved on to talking about the rules of docking. Basically, how much money it's going to cost you, what you have to do when you're docking. It's important procedure that most spacefaring places you're going to visit are going to have this basic procedure down that you can visit most ports that you can come across. In the next episode, I'm going to talk about spacefaring organizations some more. I have talked about them a little bit, but I'm going to expand upon that, talking about some more organizations and a little bit more how they're organized. So if you have any questions, comments, anything you would say, anything you think left out, please leave in the comments below. Please like, share, and subscribe. Show support the channel, the Empire, the work I do. If you want to show some extra support, you can always check out my Patreon. Link description below. But regardless, until the next time, I bid you farewell.